Hey everybody, it's Eugene Liscio here, and welcome to Click 3D. This is the program where we talk about photogrammetry and also how you can use your digital camera to make some really nice 3D models. Now, today, what I thought I would do is look at laser scanning and photogrammetry and look at the pros and cons of each. And this really comes from a lot of different things you'll see on forums or even marketing emails, people promoting photogrammetry or laser scanning. They'll often put one against the other. And although I don't think that a lot of people think of it in that way, where people will say, "Oh, photogrammetry is going to replace laser scanning completely," or something like that. It does come up every now and then, and so it's always good to understand, when you're going to use one technology or the other. And even in my own work, if I have a situation where somebody says, "Hey, we'd like you to go do a certain project, and you need to document this," I often have to think, the laser scanner like this one over here is often my go-to. So that's the first thing I think of. But there are many times where I can just say, hey, you know what? This would be a really good job for photogrammetry, for a 360 camera, for something else. It really just depends on what the person is looking for. So for today's topic, I am going to be talking about the pros and the cons of photogrammetry and laser scanning. And so we're going to talk about the good, we're going to talk about the bad, and we are going to talk about the ugly here. So there's a list of 13 items that I've made, and those 13 items I think cover pretty well a lot of the different topics that people will raise in terms of, what is good or what is bad. And sometimes one particular thing might be more important to you than something else. So, it could be accuracy or it could be portability or something like that. And that's okay. That may be the deciding factor in many cases. But let's go through them and let's see what we can talk about in terms of each one here. The first one is going to be hardware. Okay, so what is the equipment that you need in order to work with photogrammetry, and what is the equipment and hardware that you're going to need in terms of laser scanning? So let's start with photogrammetry. So the nice thing about photogrammetry is that you really just need a digital camera. So that means it can be your phone. That means it could be a webcam. That means it could be something like an in-car camera or a body camera. It could even be something, just something on your tablet or whatever else. So the fact that cameras are everywhere, the fact that they are relatively low cost, means that the investment in hardware when it comes to photogrammetry is very low. Now, there are other things. So as I'm showing on this slide here, there's tripods, there are different types of lenses, there's lighting, there's remotes, there's all kinds of other things that you can get for this, including 360-degree cameras, multiple camera setups and rigs. So, you can go down that rabbit hole and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper if you want. However, the basis is really just the camera, and that's really what you need. Now, when we talk about a laser scanner, okay, the laser scanner itself means that you've got a piece of equipment which is very specific. You don't just go to the store and pick up a laser scanner. They are typically expensive, and you typically want to be careful with them. So, you do have a tripod that you'll often need, and sometimes there are other accessories. So, for example, with laser scanning, you may want to use targets in some cases, or I should say, in some cases, you have no choice but to use targets. But often, you can get away without them. But certainly, the type of equipment that you have with a laser scanner is something very specific, whereas with photogrammetry, it's very general. And then from there, the world is your oyster, depending on how much money you want to throw at it in terms of what you want to buy for hardware. Now, let's talk about software. So when it comes to photogrammetry, you typically buy a piece of software with photogrammetry, and that's going to be your main piece of kit. So you got your hardware, let's say, and then the software that makes up the 3D models for you. So there isn't a lot more that you need when you're working with photogrammetry software. Now, the investment on some of the software is going to be reasonable. So, in terms of the complexity and all that sort of thing and what it can do, both laser scanner software and photogrammetry software can get you a decent output, can get you, a bunch of photographs that are all aligned, and you have a 3D model that's reconstructed. And with the laser scanner, you have individual scans which have to be registered together. So the workflow is a little bit different. And in terms of the dollar investment, it is about the same. So, for a few $1,000s, you can get a full-fledged, photogrammetry software package with all the bells and whistles. And on the laser scanning side, it's probably a little more expensive, but it typically does the same thing. So not a lot of difference there. You still need software in both cases. And depending on what you're going to do afterwards, it might even require a second or third piece of software. But in terms of just getting to a point where you have a point cloud or you have a 3D model, both software, in both cases, software will be required. Okay, this is a big one: documentation speed. So when it comes to how quickly you can document something, in general, photogrammetry is going to be faster. Okay, and let's look at a couple of scenarios here. If I have a small object like a shoe, or something bigger like a trash can, or even bigger like a car or whatever, in terms of documenting something like that with a digital camera, it's really, really fast. I can just take the camera out and I, go around the object, take a whole number of photographs, and really it's just click, 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 and you're typically doing okay there. Now, there are instances where it will take a little bit longer. So if you're using a tripod and the camera and you're using an extended shutter speed, it will take you a little bit longer. But let's look at something on the other side of the spectrum, which is something really big. So if I'm using a drone as my platform that's going to carry my camera, then I can map out, or I can collect or document an area very, very quickly. And that's because I'm high up, I capture an image which is rather wide. And so in 10 minutes of flight time on a drone, I can capture a lot of area really, really, really fast. Now, the laser scanner sort of has a number of choices in terms of the documentation speed, and that really comes down to the resolution. So if I'm in a small area, 20, 30 meters, 40 meters, or if I'm going to do a few rooms inside of a house, well, I can reduce the resolution and I can typically move faster. However, you're kind of limited in that you can really only go, it's like 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, something like that, sometimes even more per scan. And that's to collect all the data and then to collect photographs. So in those cases, if you have to do a wide area, laser scanning is going to take a very long time. Okay, especially if you have sort of a wide, long stretch of space, let's say like a long straight roadway. The laser scanner just can't jump from one spot, way down to another spot. You try to keep the scans relatively close, and so long as that they can connect, and you sort of have a series of scans that get registered together. So that takes a bit more time. Also, if you're in an indoor space and you're scanning, the space can be small, but if you have a lot of little areas that are hidden, or there's line of sight issues, a lot of little rooms, well, you have to scan in all of those rooms. So now it takes time, not because the scan time is taking a long time, but because you have a lot of little spaces that you have to scan. So in general, the documentation speed on photogrammetry is a plus, and that's probably a winner there in my books, because you can typically go faster. Now, it doesn't mean you can use it in every single place, but it is typically faster. Let's talk about what kinds of things cause problems for both photogrammetry and laser scanners. Shiny, transparent surfaces. So if you're doing a building such as this, the one that I'm showing you here, and all of a sudden you have windows and glass and that sort of thing, then you've got a problem. Okay, you got a problem because in terms of the laser, there's an issue because the laser is going to pass through transparent surfaces, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems. When you go through a dense material like glass, the index of refraction changes, and that basically bends the light. So if you get a return on that, that means it passes through twice. It goes through once and it comes back. And also, if you have a thick piece of glass, the speed of light in glass is different than in air. And so you have some other issues there that are happening. Nonetheless, you just don't get a really good set of data when you go through glass. Okay, so it causes a problem. On the photogrammetry side, we suffer from the same problem, but for different reasons. So we're not emitting any laser light or anything like that. That's going to, we have to worry about sort of index of refractions and stuff. But what happens is, in photogrammetry, you're looking for matching textures and you're matching pixels from one image to another. And as a result, if I have a reflective surface, as I move around that reflective surface, I get bright spots, I get reflections, and so the reflection is moving. So if I'm trying to match something that should be fixed in one photo and the next photo, and it just keeps moving around all over the place, I've got a problem. I just can't use shiny, transparent surfaces. They give you all kinds of issues. And that's very clear, for example, when you're scanning something like a car. The laser scanner has a slight advantage when it's shiny. So dark, black, shiny vehicles are a problem for photogrammetry, and they're a problem for laser scanners. But laser scanners will tend to give you better data. So in this metric, okay, for shiny, transparent surfaces, I would give the laser scanner a little bit more of an advantage over photogrammetry. Photogrammetry, you end up with a big mess. And at least with the laser scanner on a shiny surface, you can kind of get something. Now, it can't be mirror-like. If it's like a mirror and it's really, really reflective, then you're basically in trouble both ways. But if it's dark and shiny or something like that, you can get a bit more data out of a laser scanner. Okay, let's move on. Number 5. So for number 5, we are going to be talking about lighting and what the effect of lighting is on capturing, and what photogrammetry can do and what the laser scanner can do. So if we think about the laser scanner first, it's a different type of instrument because it's what's called an active instrument, in the sense that it sends out its own laser. And if I take the scanner here, and I'll just show you here, there's a little window inside here, and that's where the laser module is. And so it's going to hit this mirror that's on a 45-degree angle. And when this spins around here, you basically have this laser, like a laser pointer, that's just kind of spinning around. And the whole scanner, moves horizontally in a 360. So what that means is the laser scanner has its own lighting, or it has its own light source. It has what it needs to capture the data. So if you're in a completely pitch black scene or room or whatever, you can still capture data. You'll still have geometry. Now, there is a camera in there as well that's going to be capturing photographs, and that is what will suffer. So if you're trying to capture beautiful colors in a very, very dark environment, it's just not going to happen. Now, many laser scanners today have high dynamic range and that sort of thing. They're okay. They're not too bad, but they're not fantastic. They're not going to give you the same result as a really nice digital SLR camera. But again, the advantage of the laser scanner is that you can always scan and pick up geometry data, regardless of the lighting situation. On older scanners, depending on the wavelength that was emitted, if it was really, really, really sunny outside, then it would cause a problem. And some scanners that use wavelengths of light that are in the 800 or 900 range, something like that, they're going to be fighting with the sun outside. So very, very bright conditions, your range will drop off with those types of sensors or scanners, whether it's a structured light scanner or a LiDAR scanner or whatever. However, most laser scanners nowadays will use a wavelength that's at about 1550 nanometer. That's a very, very specific wavelength. And the reason that they use that is that this particular wavelength gets absorbed in the atmosphere. So the sun emits all different wavelengths and all different gamma rays, X-rays, everything else, including 1550 nanometer, but it gets absorbed by moisture. So if you're down on the earth and you're looking at a very, very narrow band, 1550 nanometers is basically like if the scanner shines the laser on or turns the laser on, it's like shining a flashlight on at night. It's very, very visible. So that's useful, and it doesn't drop off very much when it's a bright sunny day. Now let's look at the other side here of photogrammetry. Now, what happens with lighting? Well, photogrammetry depends on photographs, which is going to depend on photographic best practices, photography best practices. So if you have poor lighting, if you have crappy lighting, if it's really, really dark, you need to take measures to either add light, reduce light, make the light more even, or whatever it is that you need to do in order to bring out as much texture as possible of your subject. And that's really what it comes down to. You need super, super good lighting for your subject. If you have a really bright sunny day and there's a lot of harsh shadows, like you get these really harsh dark and light, right? The camera can only focus on, or expose for the dark areas or the light areas. It just can't do both at the same time. Now, some of you might say, hey, well, there's high dynamic range. That is a possibility for sure. So if you want to take a tripod and take some pictures and then use HDR, combine the images, then you get the best of both worlds. So that is possible. But if you're just talking about taking straight pictures, then lighting is definitely going to be an issue. High contrast areas are going to be definitely an issue, and even really, really dark scenes are going to be a problem. So in very, very dark scenarios, you're going to need extended exposures. You're definitely going to need a tripod. You're not going to get away with that. And so there are things you need to do there, but photogrammetry is going to be much more affected by lighting. And the best situation you can have for photogrammetry, as a lot of people know, is just a really overcast day. Okay, not the bright sun, but just a really diffuse lighting when it's really, really cloudy. So that's the best situation you can have there. So that's lighting. Let's move on to number 6. Indoor versus outdoor documentation. So what's the difference between scanning indoors versus scanning outdoors, or doing photogrammetry indoors versus doing photogrammetry outdoors? Well, if we're indoors, photogrammetry has a little bit of a disadvantage. Okay, so typically when we take the camera and we want to photograph an object, we want to move around the object. Photogrammetry does great when it can get around the object. So if you're outside and there's a house and you can take photos by walking around the house or flying a drone and doing almost like a circle or a ring around the object, photogrammetry works great. Okay, however, it doesn't like to do the opposite. So if I'm in a room, if I'm in a box and I want to photograph all the walls and the ceiling and the floor, that's a lot more difficult. Okay, so you think about it, you have to stand on the opposite corner and kind of take photos and then kind of move around. It is a little bit more time consuming. It's a little bit more difficult. It's harder to get all the different areas. Now, there's other tricks you can play or things you can use, like 360-degree cameras and that sort of thing. And I've got some videos on the Click 3D series about using 360 cameras. So you can do some things there, but it's definitely much more difficult. Now, when it comes to the laser scanner, it really doesn't matter if you're inside or outside. It tends to capture the same thing, same kind of level of accuracy or whatever. So from that regard, it's pretty good. So you can bring it inside, you can just scan different areas, and the scanner captures from the inside out, meaning that it's the central point and it just kind of, spins around and is looking all around it in a 360, and that's how it captures. Whereas the photogrammetry, or the camera with photogrammetry, doesn't like to be in a fixed position and then just kind of rotate around that position. It needs to move its position around the object. It does better when you do it that way. Now, if you're doing 360 images, again, you can be in one spot, but you can't just do one 360 image. You need multiple positions. And again, it's that issue of being able to move around. So from this perspective, indoor versus outdoor, laser scanner has a little bit of an advantage here. Let's move on to number 7. Scale. So, what do I mean by scale? Well, scale refers to what size of an object that I can scan or that I can document. Now, when it comes to the laser scanner, one thing that people feel comfortable with is when you buy it, you get sort of a fixed accuracy. The manufacturer says, it's good to a millimeter or two or whatever, up to 10 meters or 20 meters or 30 meters, whatever it might be. And you kind of live with that and you kind of go with that. So you kind of know that, if you're going to be scanning something that's only a few millimeters big, it's not the right instrument to be using for that. And I mean the laser scanner, right? If it has, for example, if you have a laser scanner that has a 5 or let's say a 1 centimeter accuracy, right? I wouldn't want to scan something that's only 5 millimeters, right? That's just too small. So people feel comfortable with that because it's sort of fixed from the manufacturer, the way it comes. Now, photogrammetry, though, is a little different. And the reason is that there is no fixed scale. So when we talk about photogrammetry, we're often talking about a sliding scale. Okay, we can photograph things which are big and we can photograph things which are very, very small. The limitations there are really just the equipment that you have. So if you have a drone, and you can get it up to a few hundred feet or whatever, and you want to fly it across a very, very large area, there's no problem in doing that. So we can photograph things that are very, very big and cover a very, very wide area pretty quickly. Now, if you want to do something very, very small, so if you want to do something the size of a cartridge case, if you want to do something, like an SD card here or something like that, that's very tiny, photogrammetry would be a better solution than something like the LiDAR scanner. It's just not intended to do things that are very, very small. So from the perspective of looking at the scale of the kinds of objects that you want to document, photogrammetry has a slight advantage here as well. Okay, let's move on to number 8. Flexibility. So in terms of flexibility, what do I mean? Well, I mean, how can you use the tool to do different things? And so I just talked about scale. And so photogrammetry has a little bit more flexibility in that regard because, it can do big objects and small objects. But what other things can you do with it? Well, photogrammetry is great because, for example, you can mount the camera on a pole. You can put it underwater. Think of all the different places that you could put a camera, and on an airplane or like whatever, you can fly around with it. So it has a lot of different uses, a lot of different things that you can do with it. You can even hook up multiple cameras and come with a complete sort of rig. And sometimes you'll see people that have these 3D booths where you walk in and you have, like 120 cameras that are all shooting at the same time. So it allows you a lot of flexibility. You can do a lot of things with photogrammetry. Now, the laser scanner is also pretty good. So, for example, you can mount it, in holes. You can use it in very dark places. So, if people were doing like sewers or tunnels and things like that, you don't need any lighting. You can mount it upside down, and that's okay. But you can't really mount it on a moving object. It's not really intended for something like that. So, in terms of flexibility, the digital camera photogrammetry has a little bit of an advantage. And again, underwater, being able to mount it on moving objects and things like that. The fact that you can even use video to create 3D models with photogrammetry, I think it gets a little bit of a bonus mark there. So in that regard, I think photogrammetry wins in the flexibility area. Accuracy. Okay, this is a big topic, and a lot of people always say, which one's more accurate? Which one's more accurate? The answer is there is no real answer because it depends. It depends on a lot of different things. So the easy one is the laser scanner, and I touched on it just before. When you receive the laser scanner, you typically get a calibration certificate, and it says this instrument was calibrated to some known standard or a known reference, and you basically get a known manufacturer stated accuracy. So you know that from up to 25 meters and out until 50 meters or whatever, you can rely on the fact that the instrument is going to fall within a certain specification. So that's good. That's easy to explain to somebody. It's good to explain to other people, right? That really don't understand it. You can say, well, look, it's good to a couple of millimeters, and you're good to go. However, the error compounds depending on what you're doing. And so, for example, if I'm doing a long straight stretch of roadway with the laser scanner, and I'm just doing one scan after another scan after another scan after another scan, the errors start to compound because it's not just the laser scanner. There are errors with registration. With when I put these little pieces of the laser scans together, or these pieces of the puzzle, the individual scans together, and then they build up and build up. So errors can build up. Now, you can improve on that if you have some kind of ground control or survey control, sort of fixed points or reference points that tell you where the scan, or where a specific point in a scan is located in sort of the big picture. But accuracy there just kind of depends. But typically fixed and typically well understood, let's say, for certain size areas for the laser scanner. Now let's talk about photogrammetry. So photogrammetry doesn't have a fixed accuracy, and it depends a lot on a number of factors, and that gives people an uncomfortable feeling. So when talking about accuracy, people don't like to say, well, it depends and can't really be sure because there's a number of factors here or whatever. So photogrammetry is a little bit trickier. And what kinds of things am I talking about here? Well, I'm talking about things like, for example, what if your images are slightly blurred? That's going to cause a problem with the reconstruction. What if you're taking video and you're on a moving subject, like an airplane or something like that, or a drone? That's going to cause issues as well. What about the resolution of the camera? That's going to cause issues as well. And then, of course, you have to put the whole reconstruction together. You have to register or reconstruct all these images. And of course, that will cause you some problems as well. So when we're talking about photogrammetry, the answer is always that it depends. Now, there have been some studies that have compared sort of a similar sized object, let's say like a parking lot or something like that, to the laser scanner. And in fact, I did a study a while back where I took a parking lot, and in the parking lot, what I did was take a total station and mark a bunch of points. Then we flew a drone and we created a 3D model, and then we laser scanned it and we made comparisons all together. So what I found there was that although the drone works really, really fast, the higher up you go, the farther away you are, you don't typically get the same type of accuracy that you do with a laser scanner. And that's, in a controlled test and in a smaller area. So, if you have GPS coordinates, if you have control and you do a very, very big area, then photogrammetry and laser scanning may be about equivalent. So when it comes to accuracy, it's hard to say which one wins. Okay. The answer is that it depends on what your scenario is, the size and scale of the environment or the object that you're scanning. So in some cases, photogrammetry would be the clear winner, especially if you're doing a very small object and you're getting below, a millimeter or two accuracy. While in other areas where it's really, really big or medium sized, a few hundred meters, sometimes the scanner will probably do a bit better. At least that's what I found anyway. It's a good way to do that. Now, if you're doing really, really, really big roadways or miles of roadway and huge areas, then if you're using ground control points, photogrammetry and laser scanning will probably get you about the same. Okay, about the same. But again, it depends, and there's a lot of gray area here. Let's move on to number 10. Export and output options. So this is regarding what can you do with the data once you have it, right? So, you've captured all the stuff, you reconstructed it. So you've got point cloud, you have mesh models. What do you have? So the laser scanner typically creates a point cloud. That's what it does. That's what the laser scanner captures. It captures millions and millions of points. And then when you put those points together, you end up with a point cloud. Not a lot of laser scanning software or registration software does a very good job of providing a high quality mesh. And that's typically because that the textures which are on the mesh are not really that great. The camera that's on the digital camera just can't compete with the camera that's on the laser scanner, okay, so there's a little camera in there. It's not going to be like a full frame sensor in a digital camera. And so as a result, the photogrammetry models typically will get you to a textured mesh. And so you'll have that option to you. So if you're creating models for games, or you want like a really nice quality, visual, good looking model, this is where photogrammetry really, really shines. Now, both have the option to export to different types of point cloud formats like E57 or PTS or PLY or whatever. But photogrammetry will be able to typically get you an STL output. It will be able to get you an OBJ model, which is a textured mesh. And there's some other things that you can do sometimes in photogrammetry software. So in this regard, I would give photogrammetry a little bit of a bonus here, a little bit of an advantage when it comes to your type of export options and what you can do. Okay, let's talk about portability. Portability is really important because you don't want to be hauling around a lot of equipment. Now, in terms of the laser scanner, they've gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, which is fantastic, and they're really not all that heavy. You can fit everything into just a handheld case, but they are still a little bit heavier, and there's usually a little bit more equipment that you're going to need in terms of the laser scanner. And so sometimes if you're carrying spherical targets or checkered targets, sometimes there's additional tripods that you need to hold things, or whatever. And so the laser scanner, although it is quite portable and quite small, there's even like backpacks where you can keep everything in. At the very, very minimum, you're talking about something that's, maybe whatever, 12 pounds or something like that, maybe a little bit more depending on how heavy your tripod is, but it's something you can throw in a backpack and you can kind of get around with no problem. In terms of the equipment needed for the photogrammetry sort of avenue, well, there you're talking about a camera. And so, a lot of people, that's all I need to document with photogrammetry. So it's not really that much. Is it portable? Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, if you're doing fancier stuff and you need a big tripod, lighting, or whatever, sure, there's going to be more that's going to be required in your kit. But for the most part, you don't need a whole heck of a lot in terms of the photogrammetry equipment. And so I would say, portability wise, you can do more with photogrammetry. It's more portable. You can throw multiple cameras. You can use different types of cameras, very, very small cameras, like GoPro cameras even. You can throw like 8 or 10 or 20 GoPros easily in a big backpack, and all of a sudden you have all kinds of equipment available to you, and you can carry it just about anywhere, whether you're going on a plane or whether you're driving someplace. You can easily get across the border. If you're flying internationally, a camera is just a camera. Nobody really cares. But if you're carrying a laser scanner, people at security want to know what the heck you got in the case. So I think in this one, photogrammetry wins too in terms of portability. Let's move on to number 12. Cost and maintenance. Well, if you have, all kinds of money, great. It doesn't matter. But most of us have to worry about how expensive is the equipment and how expensive is the upkeep. So we already talked about the hardware side and the software side. So the cost there, photogrammetry, is pretty good. It's probably the lower cost of the two because, even if you bought a really expensive digital camera, you may be $4,000 or $5,000 there. The software, if you get the full software, you're talking about maybe another, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, a little bit of equipment. Let's say with $10,000, you got a really, really good kit. But you can also use lower cost stuff. And even on the software side, there's many options. You can get free photogrammetry software, and even a lot of the developers will get you software for a couple $100. So, for $300 or $400, you can end up with a pretty decent photogrammetry kit. And so there's no way that the laser scanner can compete. Laser scanners come in, different shapes and sizes and accuracies, but no matter what, you're always talking about, something on the order of like $20,000 to start with, right up to, 100,000 or more in terms of the equipment and everything else. Now, in terms of maintenance on the software side, many manufacturers will want you to pay for, maintenance upgrades or yearly upgrades or something like that. Well, on the laser scanning side, it is going to be more expensive, no doubt. Okay, so most laser scanner manufacturers are going to get you on the maintenance side, and it's going to be anywhere from $1,000 to a few $1,000s there. On the photogrammetry side, if you're looking at photogrammetry upgrades, it's just usually the yearly cost of the software. Also, you have to keep in mind that there's also monthly plans sometimes with the photogrammetry manufacturers. So it's usually more cost effective with photogrammetry. The other thing to consider here is maintenance on the hardware. If we're talking about a digital camera, there isn't a lot you need to do other than keeping the equipment clean, ensuring that your lenses are clean. There's no junk in the or dust and dirt inside of the camera body and that sort of thing. So you can get away with a lot, and they're very, very durable. On the laser scanner side, manufacturers are going to want you to get the instrument calibrated every year. And calibration is a big cost. It'll cost you thousands of dollars. You send it back, you lose the equipment for a little while, and there's shipping costs, there's all kinds of other things. So unfortunately, from a cost and maintenance standpoint, photogrammetry is the clear winner there. It's definitely more economical when using the laser scanner. Last one, number 13, learning curve. So it's really important to be able to adapt this very quickly and kind of get going. So in this regard, the software is about the same on both sides, whether it's photogrammetry or laser scanner. If you look at the packages and how comprehensive they are on both sides, they're fairly detailed, and there's a lot of stuff there. So it's going to take a little bit of time to learn either way. On the equipment side, most people are fairly familiar with taking photographs, so there isn't a lot there. However, I will say this: a lot of people really just know the bare bones basics when working with their camera. They haven't really explored high dynamic range. They haven't really played a lot with manual settings, and so although some have, not everybody has. So it does have a little bit of an advantage there because the camera is a lot more familiar to people. Now, the laser scanner, although it's very easy to use, in fact, if you can use your mobile phone and a lot of the apps and stuff that are on here, you can probably learn it in half a day or so. But there are some little things that you need to get used to in terms of how to scan, where to place the scanner, what kinds of things you can scan and not scan. So there's a little bit more learning curve there when it comes to the laser scanner. And the same goes for when processing and getting under different situations. There's different things you can do in the laser scanner software. So I think in this regard, for number 13, the laser scanner is a little bit at a disadvantage. Okay, so it takes a little bit more effort in terms of a learning curve. Now, I've gone through a whole list of things here, and it may seem like I might be biased to photogrammetry a little bit. But the truth is that you really can't say one is going to offset the other. Both of these technologies and both of these instruments are super useful no matter what you're doing. Okay. Now, the fact that photogrammetry is a little bit lower cost is great because you can easily add it to your kit without breaking the bank. However, it just doesn't work in all scenarios, and it's not going to give you what you need every single time. So as a result, the laser scanner is sort of the go-to every time when you really want to depend on the level of accuracy, when you know that it's just going to work day or night, cold, dark, whatever. It really is a go-to instrument, and that's partly the reason why it is a little bit more expensive. But I will say this, both are super useful, and I would recommend if somebody is into laser scanning and they haven't gotten into photogrammetry, it's a really easy path to follow and to go down to because you probably already have the equipment and the software is not going to be a big stretch for you. So if you were thinking that I was going to say something like, laser scanning is the clear winner or photogrammetry is the clear winner, it's really not working that way today. This is really about just trying to understand the differences. What are some of the advantages? What are some of the disadvantages of each? And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I hope that that was hopefully that was useful for you, looking at some of the differences. I know that was pretty comprehensive and kind of a little bit of a long talk. But on that note, we'll leave it at that. You will make your own decisions, and I hope to see you next time on Click 3D. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.